It's the morning of September 11th, and we see passengers getting ready to board their flight on what seems like any other day. They grab their bags, and security lets them through without suspecting a thing. The pilots and flight attendants smile and chat, completely unaware that in just a few hours, their plane will be attacked, leaving no survivors. Right there, two men who look Middle Eastern exchange glances like they're sharing some secret message. The men approach. The door and the guards quickly scan them with an X-ray machine, give them the okay, and let them into the boarding area. Since, after all, there's no reason to distrust the passengers. They look like anyone else on the plane. Plus, the security check didn't raise any alarms. Still, these guys seem a bit worried. You can clearly tell they're nervous. When it's time to board, they're the first to get on and take their seats. Arab men with a fierce look in their eyes. The other passengers board and stow their bags, and the flight takes off. Once they're high enough, one of the Arab passengers gets up to use the bathroom and starts assembling a bomb, kicking off his plan. The other terrorists get up from their seats and begin stabbing the crew with small knives, which were allowed on flights at the time. And they control the rest of the passengers using gas, tear gas. Desperation fills the cabin, and fear takes over everyone, knowing this could be the end. The terrorists manage to get into the cockpit, take control, and divert the plane toward New York. They also turn off the transponder, making the plane vanish from commercial radar. After a few minutes of flying, the terrorists in charge spot their target, the Twin Towers. While all this chaos is happening in the air, on the streets of New York was just having a perfectly normal day. People were going about their usual routines. Some were jogging through Central Park, others were driving to work, and some were already at their offices, since it was about 8:40 in the morning. Hundreds of thousands of people trusted it would be just another ordinary day, but they were very wrong. After 32 minutes of flight, the plane finally reached its terrible target, and from that moment on, the world was never the same again. Even the people on the street can't believe what they're seeing. The city's most iconic building, maybe even the whole country's, is now a ball of fire, smoke, and debris, swaying high up. Everyone on the plane dies instantly, and so do a lot of people inside the building. Those who survive are badly hurt and in serious danger because the smoke makes it impossible to breathe and the flames keep spreading. Ambulances and police are rushing to the scene. The firefighters arrive quickly at the scene, and some of them start climbing up to help. But what a lot of people don't realize is that this nightmare is just beginning. Reporters and news crews show up soon after and manage to film the destruction of the building's floors from different angles. While one reporter is getting ready, suddenly a second plane appears in the sky and crashes into the other tower, causing a massive explosion. The firefighters act as fast as they can. The goal was to evacuate the survivors from the towers, since they could collapse at any moment. People on the streets were visibly shaken, staring in horror. A building engulfed in flames, with people fighting for their lives. In the midst of the panic, many still trapped on the affected floors had no choice but to cling to the outside of the building, just to keep from suffocating. Smoke, or being painfully consumed by the flames, some managed to hold on with all their strength, but others aren't so lucky and end up falling in front of horrified onlookers. The President of the United States at that time was George Bush. When the disaster happened, he was visiting a school in Florida. At first, they told him there had been a crash, but said it was an accident, so he was relatively calm. However, a security officer to report that a second plane has crashed and that the United States is under attack. The president tries to stay calm as he finishes his engagement and then steps aside to deliver a message to the nation, revealing that the country is under attack by terrorists. After that, he's taken to a bunker for safety. Meanwhile, in New York, ambulances, doctors, and police are doing everything they can to evacuate people. People tried to protect others, and even some civilians stayed behind to help, but that couldn't last long. About an hour after the impact, one of the towers collapsed, with people still inside. Huge clouds of dust, as tall as multi-story buildings, rose up, making people run, terrified, looking for shelter. Some were swallowed by the dust and shards of glass, while others managed to take cover inside nearby shops and stores, their faces covered in dust. That day, two more also crashed. There were two planes. One targeted the Pentagon and another was headed for the capital. But the passengers on the second plane, Flight 93, fought fiercely against the terrorists to take back control. Sadly, they couldn't save the plane and died, but they did stop it from crashing into another building, like the terrorists had planned, saving hundreds of lives, though at the cost of their own. Once things settled down in New York, an investigation starts to find out who was behind this tragedy. The search points the government to one name: Osama bin Laden, leader of the Al-Qaeda organization. American citizens are mourning the nearly 3,000 people who died that day and are hungry for justice. Because of this, President George Bush decides to deliver it, no matter what it takes, a promise he makes clear in a speech where he declares war on the men of terror. At the end of the speech, Bush clarifies that America's enemy is not our many friends, Muslims, nor our many Arab friends are our enemy. Our enemy is a radical network of terrorists and every government that supports them. Our war on terror starts with Al-Qaeda, but doesn't end there. It won't be over until every global group is found, stopped, and defeated. What very few people know is that this group was actually largely created by the US government itself. In fact, here's a news report where the US government openly talks about it. Bin Laden was actually backed by the government in the first place. I know this might be pretty new info for some, but let me explain. There are two versions of the story. One is the one we all know, where the US is the perfect victim. The other one's a bit more complicated. I'm not here to tell you what to believe, since I'm not even sure myself, but I'm here to share the other side of the story, a more nuanced version. Now, oil is the engine that drives the world, and the States, the US, was one of the first countries to catch on to this. It's 1930, and a California oil company strikes a huge oil reserve in Saudi Arabia. So they build a plant right there, and the workers, along with their families, move from the US, bringing a strong American influence to the area. The locals aren't happy about it, but the king loves it, because he's thrilled with the wealth the oil has brought to the country. They start being very lenient with, in the US, they even got permission to build a military base near the factory. Obviously, this upset a lot of people, but since they're getting rich, it seems like they can put up with it a bit longer. Now, the US has the factory, homes for families, and a military base in the Middle East. But all this infrastructure has to come from somewhere, right? It turns out the construction company they hired to do much of this work belongs to a man named Mohammed. He has a ton of money from his big construction company and also has a lot of kids, but one of them is named Osama bin Laden. Time goes by and the resentment towards the United States abroad grows. By the 60s, a new threat arises for the US. Communism. Since the Soviet Union has strong ties with Iran, the US pulls strings to overthrow Iran's government and installs a dictator who bends to their interests. On top of that, they supply him with arming Israel to fight its conflicts and increasing the presence of the US military in the area. By this time, the moment has passed, and now Osama bin Laden's father and his entire family are extremely wealthy, thanks to construction businesses. Bin is now a young adult, more aware of what's going on around him, and he understands that his country's instability and the heavy foreign presence on their land partly his family's fault, since they laid the groundwork for the US. He felt that the United States was invading his home and also saw the presence of Americans in Saudi Arabia as a sign of disrespect, since it's considered holy land for Muslims. This realization pushed bin Laden to want to do something against foreign control over the Middle East, to fight for the freedom of his land. The first step on his new path was moving to Afghanistan, arriving with a lot of money, construction equipment, and, most importantly, a steely determination to fight. Against any superpower trying to take over their land, he joins the resistance known as the Mujahideen and offers them his resources to fight the long battle ahead. Their first target is the Soviet Union, which also had its hands in these lands. This obviously scores him a lot of points with the United States, so much that American newspapers even publish reports calling Osama anti-communist warrior, praise his efforts. The US then decides to support the resistance, and Osama got money, weapons, and training. That's right, bin Laden was funded and trained by the CIA itself. Eventually, the resistance wins and the Soviet Union retreats. But for Osama, the fight is just beginning. While he was in Afghanistan, he created his own faction of Mujahideen, and now he's heading back to Saudi Arabia. The group is called Al-Qaeda, and their goal is to protect Islam and its traditions through violent means against external threats. Sometime later, a battle breaks out between Saudi Arabia and Iraq, wanted a small piece of land right between the two places, called Kuwait. Iraq and its dictator Saddam Hussein had a huge army, the fourth biggest in the world at that time. So Saudi Arabia asked the United States for help, and they sent it. Tanks, ships, warplanes, explosives, you name it. Within weeks, Hussein pulled out of Kuwait. The threat was stopped. However, the US bases that were built to deal with Hussein stayed, and the locals didn't like having foreign troops around. Nothing to the locals, and even less to bin Laden, who, let's remember, is fighting to drive foreign powers out of their lands and protect the Muslim religion. Bin goes to Somalia for a while to plan his attacks against the invaders, and from there he organizes a series of attacks on US embassies in Middle Eastern countries. By the late 90s, he starts planning the September 11th attacks, a tragedy that, as we've seen, caused hundreds of deaths and is about to cause even more. The Iraq and Afghanistan wars were the worst. After the events of September 11th, the United States decided to put all its military efforts, thousands of troops and millions of dollars, into finding and taking down one man. They wanted to find bin Laden and bring him to justice, thinking that would end the threat. Or at least, that's how it seemed on the surface. But as the video goes on, we realize the interests were also strategic and economic, just like these show us. Amazing photos showing US soldiers in rooms and containers full of gold bars. And it's not just one photo, there are plenty like this. Obviously, this has made a lot of people think it was all a government conspiracy, especially when you consider that beneath Iraqi soil lay some of the world's most important oil reserves, liquid gold just waiting to be extracted. But we'll get to that later. For now, it's important to remember that the extremist group that Al-Qaeda did this, but their base is in Afghanistan, a completely different country from Iraq. It's thousands of kilometers away, and they speak a different language. So if that's the case, how did it jump from just targeting a small group like Al-Qaeda to invading a country that has nothing to do with it? Well, listen up. After the attack, George Bush wasn't really sure how to respond. At least, that's how it seemed. Until a guy named Paul Wolfowitz showed up, the Deputy Secretary of State, also known as the architect of the Iraq War. This man planted the idea that the attack on the United States was way too coordinated. The hijacking of 4 planes was also carried out so flawlessly that it couldn't have been done by a country as underdeveloped as Afghanistan, and even less by a small, disorganized group like Al-Qaeda. According to him, the only explanation was that the ruthless Saddam Hussein, the dictator of Iraq, was behind it all. Many government officials, not just Paul, were fixated on the idea of overthrowing him. Saddam Hussein claimed he wanted to bring freedom to the Iraqi people, but he was a ruthless man. His dictatorship in Iraq, which lasted over 2 decades, was marked by executions and the repression of citizens' freedoms. It's easy to see why so many people wanted him out of power. However, these reasons weren't enough for the president or everyone involved in making the decision. So, Paul the architect revealed some important facts about some of the populations. Some of the most important places in Iraq, and also the ones that hated dictator Saddam Hussein the most, were located over the biggest oil fields. So it would be pretty easy to take those cities, free them, and take control of the resources, cutting off Saddam Hussein's main source of income. The invasion would be quick, and the locals would see the Americans as the liberators of their democracy. That way, they'd be killing 2 birds with 1 stone. First the oil, then the control. The military wanted to show the world and their country that they had come out victorious after the tragedy, achieving a clear win by overthrowing a dictator and restoring freedom to the nation. We already have the goals. Now all that's left is the justification to invade a country that hadn't done anything. Remember, the supposed help from Iraq to Al-Qaeda was just speculation. The response was simple. Say there were suspicions that the dictator Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction that he could hand over. There wasn't solid proof that Al-Qaeda was planning an attack even more brutal than 9/11, or that there were weapons of mass destruction. It seemed more like something made up by Paul
Wolfowitz and his supporters. Still, the idea started gaining traction among powerful US politicians. After assessing the situation, Congress voted, and the outcome cost hundreds of thousands of lives. On October 10, 2002, the US Congress approved the invasion's mission was to overthrow Saddam Hussein's regime, claiming he had weapons of mass destruction and supported terrorist acts. The bombings were brutal. US and British forces tore through everything in their path, deploying tens of thousands of troops and vehicles in the area. On April 9, 2003, the goal was achieved when US forces took the capital and, in a symbolic act, pulled down Saddam Hussein's statue in Firdos Square, marking the regime's fall. On May 1, 2003, Bush declared the end of major combat operations in Iraq, suggesting that Saddam Hussein's regime had been successfully overthrown. He made this announcement aboard an aircraft carrier with a mission accomplished banner in the background. However, that wasn't entirely true, since the former dictator was still at large and his whereabouts were unknown. That didn't last long, though, because just a few days later, he was found. A man who went from having power, mansions, and wealth ended up found. In a hole in the ground, he gave up without much resistance and was later tried and executed for war crimes. It always seemed like there were hidden agendas in Iraq. But people started to get suspicious when photos surfaced of American soldiers in rooms full of gold bars. Remember when I told you this would be important? Well, these photos were taken on the day they raided the central bank of Iraq, shortly after the dictator fell, even though it wasn't supposed to happen. Although the gold was supposed to be handed over to the proper authorities, many of the bars went missing, leading people to believe they ended up in the hands of soldiers or even American politicians. Even though the lost bars were never found, these kinds of lootings, along with the photos, seem to send a message to the whole world that the US invaded Iraq for the money. During the US stay in the Middle East, Al-Qaeda weakened and split up. But bin Laden, the main target, was still out there. He was still free, at least until the day of the Neptune Spear operation. Meanwhile, the war in Afghanistan drags on with no end in sight. The CIA is working hard on US soil to capture all the Al-Qaeda members still in the country, spending hours and hours reviewing interrogation recordings of Al-Qaeda members. But they're not getting any closer to bin Laden. Just so you know, the interrogation techniques the CIA uses are becoming more and more controversial, involving things like sleep deprivation and starvation, and other methods were used, though without much success. After a while, they managed to intercept a call between Al-Qaeda members. Thanks to that, the CIA tracked down a man named Kuwaiti, who turned out to be bin Laden's personal messenger. They found him in August 2010 in a village in Pakistan and followed him to a huge mansion. The place surprised the investigators, who, seeing the size of the house, wondered if maybe bin Laden was inside the same compound. It's not certain that he's actually living in that house, but when the CIA informs the capital, they assume bin Laden is there and start the manhunt for the guy who planned one of the worst terrorist attacks in history. They watch the house for a few months and realize there are at least 3 women and 3 men living there. They're sure one of them is bin Laden. In February,
President Barack Obama approves the operation, and preparations begin to capture the Al-Qaeda leader. On the night of May 1st, 2011, 2 military helicopters took off with a team of elite soldiers heading to bin Laden's mansion. The CIA didn't tell them what was planned for that night, fearing leaks that could compromise the mission. Still, the special forces were determined to get the job done, no matter what. As they got closer to the mansion, the soldiers prepped their night vision goggles. The helicopters landed in complete darkness. It was midnight, and you couldn't see or hear a thing. Nothing in the house. The soldiers march ahead, but just as they're about to go through a door, someone on the other side shoots at them. They shoot back, and when the gunfire stops, they ask the Kuwaiti to come out. To the team's surprise, one of the women comes out and tells them to kill him. They enter the room and find a man lying on the floor. It's the Kuwaiti, dead. They search the rest of the rooms and see a man running through the shadows. When they realize he has a weapon, they shoot. They also get rid of it. They still need to check the second floor, but the door that lets them through is locked, so they blow it open with explosives. As they go up the stairs, they see a shadow running upstairs, call out to him, and as soon as he peeks his head out, they shoot. The man who falls dead is one of bin Laden's sons. When they enter the rooms on the second floor, they find one filled with computers and files everywhere. It's the main base where bin Laden was running things. Al-Qaeda's team keeps moving, and when they get to the third floor room, they hear noises and start shooting. You can hear a woman screaming, and when they enter the room, they see a man lying on the floor. Bin Laden is dead. And well, at the end of all this, the mighty United States managed to find and dismantle the weapons of mass destruction, break up the terrorist networks everyone feared, and bring freedom to Iraq, right? Actually, no. They never even found any trace of those weapons. The networks of terror didn't disappear with the end of weapons of mass destruction. They actually broke up into smaller groups, with ISIS being one of the most important. This group, taking advantage of the power vacuum after Hussein's death, caused even more conflict and instability, especially in Iraq. In 2021, when US troops pulled out of Afghanistan, the Taliban took back control, spreading chaos and marking the start of a dark period. The most heartbreaking part was lives were lost and destruction was massive. It was a war that lasted about 20 years, killing hundreds of thousands of people, both soldiers and civilians. Families were torn apart and millions were displaced because of the violence. I'm talking about people who lost everything. Now that you have all this info, let's get back to the original question. Was the first domino, meaning the towers, an act planned by the US government itself to justify an invasion? The theories say... Conspiracy theories argue a couple of things. First, that before the Twin Towers fell, no steel frame building had ever been completely brought down. The only way those steel pillars holding up the building could be totally destroyed is through controlled demolition. People who believe these theories suggest the government rigged the towers so that when the planes hit, they would collapse entirely without a trace. Another point these folks highlight is the whole situation was handled really badly when the government found out about the planes being captured. The air traffic control agencies and the Defense Command took way too long to react. And that's not even mentioning that it could be the perfect excuse to justify an intervention aimed at taking control of resources, territory, and a lot of oil, tons of oil. A huge, flashy attack on an iconic building in a legendary spot. And if I missed any other possible reasons that could support this theory, feel free to add them, the comments, so everyone can read them, although many might say the truth lies somewhere in the middle. That is, They suffered a terrorist attack they weren't prepared for, and then when they found themselves in that situation, they mixed it with other interests to justify invading other countries. That could be it too. History, as they say, is written by the winners, but that writing is almost never an unbiased story. It's more like a version that highlights victories and justifications. Convenient stories hide the contradictions and failures, like in the case of the US, its role in 9/11 and the war on terror. It's a perfect example of how facts can be spun to serve certain interests. On the surface, it seemed straightforward, a country defending freedom and fighting evil. But things get way more complicated when you look closer at the details and the economic interests involved. Hasty decisions, interventions that left whole regions in ruins, and official stories that don't always match up with reality. When you look at it all, you realize there are no absolute heroes or villains here. There are agendas, human mistakes, and often way too much suffering for the people caught in the middle of powerful folks' decisions. The full saying about history is really like this: history is written by the winners, but we never get the whole story. Standing up for the losers doesn't mean excusing what they did or ignoring the harm they caused. It means understanding their stories and motivations to get a fuller, more critical view. History is never simple or easy to accept, but if we want to truly understand the world in any way, we have to resist the urge to settle for simple stories and always look for what's hidden beneath them.